Hi everybody, welcome along to another edition of Friday Forum Live, our weekly broadcast coming to you live and direct from Point Blank here in London. Today we're joined in the studio by Point Blank tutor and producer Anthony Chapman, who is going to be giving us a bit of an insight into some mixing techniques with distortion. So yeah, Anthony is going to be taking us through some techniques using distortion, some mixing techniques that may not be the first things that come to mind. Oh, they may not be the first things that come to mind when you think about using the effect. We're going to see how when you subtly, distortion can kind of bring out some of the sounds in your mix. As always, Friday Forum is also your chance to get involved. So all of you guys watching at home, make sure you post up in the chat room and we'll try and get all of your questions over to Anthony at the end of the session. Just before we get into it, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what's been happening this week at Point Blank. So first up, this Monday, the 9th of December, the full range of online courses get underway. We're down to the last few places, so make sure you head over to pointblankonline.net to get signed up. Also, I have to say that we have our music business offer still running. It's 50% off the online music business course. Just head over to the pointblankonline.net site and you can sign up for the course using the code MUSICBIZ001. And finally, we have the full range of courses starting here in London on January the 13th. That whole week, everything will be getting underway and we are down to the very final spots now. So make sure you head over to pointblanklondon.com and check out the full range. So yeah, that's it from me. Anthony, talk us through a little bit about what you're going to be doing for us today.
Okay, so as you uniquely summed it up, usually when we think about distortion, like in and of itself, we're normally thinking about something that's pretty kind of offensive, quite raucous, you know.
And obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also kind of inherently, in a lot of ways in the studio, distortion is usually talked about in a negative way. Because obviously sometimes you have problems in the studio, which you get distortion, and that's a bad thing. But really what I want to show you is how we can harness distortion in the mix. Not necessarily put it right up front, and it can really, really help with sort of getting stuff to be heard. Like giving things a sense of being really, really loud in the mix. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to sort of do first is just talk a little bit about what distortion is and just try to do something that, you know, as producers, we don't often take the time to sit down and do, and actually look at what different kinds of distortion is doing to our audio. Okay, so cool. Strictly speaking, when we talk about distortion, distortion is any change to a waveform. So strictly speaking, EQ is distortion. Often any kind of dynamic changes, amplitude, stuff like that, that's distortion, strictly speaking. But normally what we're talking about when we talk about distortion is saturation or overdrive, anything that's essentially really drastically changing the shape of the wave, possibly squaring it off a little bit, and creating harmonics. This is the key. This is where distortion can really get you great results. We have odd order harmonics and even order harmonics, okay? So I'm not going to go into the full science on all of that. You can Google that. It's all like numbers and stuff. But essentially what we're talking about is even order harmonics would be if you take a sound and you push the level so much that it starts to distort. Even order harmonics would be like double the frequency. So you would have, say you had, you know, 440 hertz, which is A. 880 would be the double even order harmonic, and so on and so on. Odd order harmonics would be 3 times and 5 times, and odd order harmonics generally sound quite nasty. Right. Now in the past, we did everything we could to avoid odd order harmonics, but nowadays, because of plugins and really quite sophisticated kind of DSP routines, we can actually harness odd order harmonics and use them sort of creatively. When I think of odd order harmonics in modern music, I think like dubstep, drum and bass, those really evil kind of, you know, evil sort of layers to bass sounds and stuff like that. But what you will notice on a really well mixed track like that is you still get the bottom end as well as that nastiness. And what I'll try to show you in a little bit is how to try and manage things so you can get the best of both worlds. Cool. So what I want to do is just quickly look here at a sine wave, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through some different distortions that I have in Ableton Live, and we'll just take a look at exactly what happens, okay? Now, this oscillator that I'm using, this is M Oscillator, this is Melder Productions, make this. They do a suite of free plugins, sort of utility plugins, and this is one thing, there isn't one in Ableton Live, which I think is a bit of a they really ought to get one in there. But if you use Ableton Suite, there are really good oscillator plugins for Max for Live.
Okay.
So, but I wanted to show this one because this is just like an audio unit that you can get for free, and it's really useful. It's actually, you know, it's got a lot more stuff in it than I need for this. But so I'm basically just using this to generate a sine wave. Okay. So I'm running that sine wave there. So we can see we're all kind of familiar with this standard kind of wave shape here, okay? And the first plugin that I want to try is this here, which is the standard live overdrive, okay? So I'm just going to turn this on. I'm going to open up the Q on it a bit. And we can hear that effect. And you can see, as it gets more and more distorted, you see how the shape of the wave is changing. And then when it gets really, really nasty, we're getting you see here, see these like really, really pronounced kind of teeth in it, okay? You see when I bring it back down, it gradually goes back to something resembling the original sine wave. So, you know, as you can see, that is literally what distortion is. It's changing the shape of the wave. Where the distortions differ is how we change the shape of the wave, okay? So the overdrive is effectively, the original kind of overdrives from guitar amps and stuff like that, essentially all it was adding another volume control at the end of the amp, because you know, a typical clean amp, like a hi-fi amp or something like that, you've got the volume that you turn up and it gets louder. But what they did was they thought, hang on a minute, if we put another volume control at the end, we can turn the first one up so it gets really distorted, and then we can turn the second one down so it's not deafening everybody. So this is essentially what this is doing here. Now, another totally different kind of distortion is bit crushing, okay? So I'm using the Redux device here. And what this does is it reduces the sample rate of the audio. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this. So this is great because this is like the one kind of distortion that is like completely obvious what's happening on the sine wave. So you see, as I turn up the downsampling, watch the wave. So you can see it goes from being that nice clean sine wave to those incredibly blocky things. And those weird artifacts that we get there, that's because we're reducing the sample rate below the Nyquist value. Again, this is something else. You know, this is more like techie stuff. But they're artifacts because there's frequencies in the sound that are higher than this Nyquist value. It needs to be double the highest frequency in the sound. Okay, so that's the bit crushing. I like that because that's really cool. You can see exactly what's happening. It's going all stepped. Then we've got the amp. Okay, so this is like the simulator. This is a guitar amp simulator in Live, and I actually think, in a lot of ways, this is probably the most flexible and usable distortion in Live, okay? Because what you've got to remember is, without the cabinet plug-in as well, all it is the amplifier. It's just, you can use it for distortion. It doesn't put any speaker simulation on it or anything. So if you looked into some of my projects that I've worked on, you would see like bass synths where I've used the guitar amp to distort it. So if we just pop that on, and that's the clean one, and you can see the clean one, if I turn it up, it isn't until we get right up the top that the wave starts to change shape, okay?
It's far more subtle than the other.
Yeah, I mean, because this is basically simulating probably like a Vox guitar amp, and on one of those, if you wanted to get it to bite, you would have to turn it right up, okay? But if we try like, I don't know, rock, you can see how extreme that is, okay? And then if we try heavy, it's like even more so, okay? So I really would say to people, explore using the amp plugin as distortion, okay? And there's one last one that I want to look at, because some of the stuff I'm going to show you in a few minutes, I'm going to use some third-party plugins, but they're free third-party plugins so that anybody can, you know, download. And this is I'm sure a lot of the people watching this will have seen this before, Camel Crusher by Camel Audio. This is a totally free distortion. It's really cool. I use it all the time, not just in live, in Logic, in Pro Tools, all over the place. It's really, really great. So let's just quickly see what this does, okay? So this has got two different distortion models, this tube and mech. And this tube is meant to be like valve distortion, and mech is, I think, is like solid state, okay? So if I turn up the tube, see, it's very, very subtle. It's just stretching the wave, okay? But if I turn up the mech, that squares it off much quicker. But it's actually overall a lot more subtle.
Yeah, definitely. But
it's really, really usable. It's really, really usable. Okay, now this oscilloscope that I'm using, this is a Max for Live plugin. So anyone who's watching this who's got Suite, if you go to maxforlive.com, search for oscilloscope, there's a bunch of different ones. If you ever just want to kind of look at what your plugins are doing tonally to your sound, it's really useful. Obviously, if you're running like, you know, music through it, they're a little bit harder to read. But if you just put a tone on the track and just have a look, it's just...
I think always useful to see what's going on behind it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like one of the favourite things that somebody showed me years ago is the phase trick of, like, you know, taking a sound, applying a plug-in to it, then like reversing the phase on the original sound, putting them together, and then seeing what's left, because whatever's left is what the plug-in's doing. So it's a really cool way to see that.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've seen sort of what that looks like, what the distortion looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over into an actual track. Okay, if I get this loaded up, just 1 second, there we go. So I'm going to start loading this in, and this is a remix that I did a while ago, quite a while ago, and the state it's in here is kind of half mixed, okay? And what I want to do is have a listen to some of the bits of it, okay? And just have a look at how using a bit of distortion can really kind of help with stuff that's going on. We'll just have a quick blast of this. Hope that level's okay. So it's a kind of like a fat sort of 4 to the floor thing. It's got some kind of wobble bass and stuff in it, okay? But what I want to do is I want to kind of focus on, first I want to focus on the drums, okay? So if we have a look here, I've got a group for the kick drum. So I've done a little bit already. I've kind of come, here's one I made earlier. So what I've done here is I've used the audio effects rack. So anyone who's watching this and uses Live probably knows that one of the big kind of unique selling points of Live is the rack, is the audio effects rack, because it enables us to do very, very sophisticated parallel processing. Now what I haven't done here as well is done any macro controls, because that, if you do this kind of thing, set up a rack, then set up macro controls, so you've just got all the controls that you want there. You can map those to control surface, whatever, that's fantastic. But what I've got here is I've got 2 separate chains, okay? And we're just gonna, let's just listen to the first one. I'm just gonna go back to where the drums are kind of kicking off. So that's the clean channel, okay? Now, I've got quite a lot of parallel compression in here using the glue. Okay, and remember, with compression, this is effectively a form of distortion. Yeah. Very subtle, but if any of you have ever, like, you know, done compression and you've experimented with super, super fast attack and release, it's totally distortion, because that volume envelope is going like incredibly fast, and it's effectively sawtoothing the wave. Yeah. So you do get distortion. You may notice that sometimes when you do a track, you'll think there's something distorting in there, and what it is the attack on a compressor and the release is too fast. And you tweak those a little bit and it goes away. So I've got my drum sounding pretty nice, but I'm thinking on a couple of the elements, I might be able to use a bit of distortion to really get some extra life out of it. So what I've prepared here in advance is, I'm going to turn off the clean chain. So I've got an EQ, okay, and remember, of course, the signal flow runs from left to right in the rack. I've got this EQ here, and then I've got this plugin, okay, which has the rather childish name of Winkle. and this is a freebie, Tech It Audio. If you Google for this, basically they do that thing of forcing you to like their Facebook page before you can get it. You know, which I guess is a small price to pay. But this is actually a really nice distortion. It's quite subtle, and you can do some really nice stuff with it, okay? So what I've done is, and this is something I'm going to do again and again as we go through this, is I've used EQ before we go into the distortion to shape what is going into the distortion. Because I think you get much better results if you do that than the other way around.
Right, okay.
I mean, sometimes I'll do both. Sometimes I'll do some before, some after. I know I've been on here before doing mixing stuff, and it was to do with compression. It's the same as the way as I work with compression. Bit of EQ on the way in, cuts normally, bit of EQ on the way out. So what I've decided to do here is try to shape the sound that's going into the distortion, to get the distortion to pop in a certain way, okay? Now if I crank that right up. So that's really, really, hang on a second, let's just solo my kick. What have I done here? I think I've got something soloed at the end. 1 second. There we go, he's back. So you can hear, that's pretty nasty, okay? But if we back that off, so we get it to like that. So that's the original sound there, okay? Now that's not subtle, but the distortion's not crazy on that, but really what I'm doing is I'm homing in on this pop here, and then leaving everything else flat, and all those high frequencies in the kick will go through into the distortion and will start to come out.
And it just really brings it out, doesn't it?
Exactly. So now if I pull that all the way down and I turn my clean one back on, what I'll do is just bring a bit of that up there. So I'm kind of A-B'ing it there.
Yeah.
Okay, the difference you can make is incredible, and it doesn't need to be loud at all. I mean, you look, that's minus 16 dB from Unity, so that's, you know, that's
balancing the two out to get, you know, exactly what you want.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, with all of these techniques, invariably what I would always be doing is primarily using the clean signal and augmenting that with the distorted signal. So if we have a listen to the drums again, and then if I take that out, just gives it that, you know, And I believe that when you start using effects like this, where the magic happens is where you listen to something like this on small speakers. Like if somebody listens to it on their computer or on their phone or just on their earbuds. I think that's
something I've done in the past, is put a little bit of distortion on bass, because otherwise you can't, it just gives you that sense you can feel it. It's like a ghost of it, you know it's there.
This is something I do all the time with my students, both in the college and on the online course, is getting them to try and think about, you know, trying to cater a bit to as many kind of listening environments as possible, because it's a lot more fragmented now, you know, because you know you need music for listening to in a club, but also that same person's probably going to listen to it on earbuds or on like a little phone speaker or something like that. Whereas if you go back 20 years to kind of like the height of dance music in terms of like vinyl and stuff like that, you didn't really have to worry about that, because everybody was either listening to it in a club or from vinyl on like a stereo of some kind, and they might record it onto tape and listen to it on their Walkman or in the car, but you know, you didn't really have to worry about that much. But now it is a real concern. I'm not saying we should mix for like people, you know, people who sodcasting on the bus out of their phone, you know, but you've got to think about all those.
If they were better mixed, maybe I wouldn't mind.
Maybe, yeah, exactly. Absolutely, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna sort of move on and try and apply some similar stuff on the snare as well. Okay. So this is where I'm at the moment with the snare. So this is just like a single sample. This was originally a drum rack, which I've sort of split out into individual chains, okay? And it's got a little bit of EQ on it. But what I think I want to do is try to fill in some of the gaps in the sound with a bit of distortion as well. So again, what I'm going to do is make an audio rack, audio effects rack, okay? Go into the chain view, and I'm going to call this Oops, hang on a second. I'm going to have to ungroup this and do this a slightly different way. Here we go. Right, okay. So going to my chains list. So that's going to be my clean chain. And this is going to be my distorted chain, okay? And I'm just going to turn off the clean one for a moment. And let's go and grab, if I go into my plugins, I want to grab that Camel Crusher, okay? Now the thing is here, I could, on the Camel Crusher and a lot of other effects, and a lot of the live devices, I could just use the dry and wet mix, okay? But I think I always prefer to do it in a rack because you can also process it differently, okay? So if I just run the snare through that, so you can hear that sounding like rather rude, okay? So I could just, you know, I could just give it a bit of like dry and wet balance, but what I want to do is kind of tweak this a bit so I get the bits that I actually want to be going through in the distortion. And what I actually want is maybe to focus in on some of the sort of lower mid kind of sort of thump, rather than the crack up high, because there's loads of that there already. But like, if we look at the spectrum here, you can see it's got like a, like that, some of that stuff. And also, you know, I might like filter out a little bit of like real low frequencies there as well, and then possibly some. See, because this is why I like doing it in the rack, because I like to be able to completely treat it separately, okay? The other thing about the Camel Crusher is it's got a really nice resonant filter on it as well, which you can automate as well, which is really, really cool. So again, this is a phenomenal plugin for £0. So, right, okay, so let's have a listen again to our clean snare there. It's really jarring, isn't it, when you go back to the clean one, because you really get used to listening to that real grungy one. Yeah, like that. If I take it out. Okay, now if we listen to it in context, it's out now. If I put it in. See, and look, I'm actually pulling the level down because the distortion is helping it to really like cut through everything in the mix. One of the things about distortion, using distortion in this way, we have to remember is one of the effects distortion has is it drastically reduces the dynamic range. So in theory, anything that's distorted in this sort of way, this kind of overdrive, wave shaping sort of distortion, will just stick out like that in the mix, like, you know, because all of that kind of subtlety of the dynamic range will just be squashed out of it. So, so I think, you know, for the kick and snare there, that's worked really, really nicely.
And they work together really well.
Yeah, and it's just that idea of, you know, getting those kind of high frequencies to sort of pop out, you know, well, high mid and also in the snare, those low mids to really make it thump, you know. Now, I don't know if you've got any questions or anything.
Got kind of a more of a general question actually. Deppy Zagst has asked, Anthony, how did you first start getting into producing music?
Oh, blimey. Right, okay. I was always, the first kind of music that I was crazy about when I was a kid was like really early hip hop and electro. So in sort of 1982 when I was 10, it was like Buffalo Girls by Malcolm McLaren. I remember hearing that record and it just completely blew my mind. And I always wanted to make music like that. Right. And I got the 7-inch single, you know, probably from like W.H. Smith's or something. And on the back, it kind of had instructions about how to make a record like that. It was kind of, you know, it was a very 80s kind of arty sort of cover, you know, Malcolm McLaren. But it had things about, you know, all you need is 2 turntables and a beatbox. And at the time, I had no idea. I didn't even know turntables were a record player. Yeah. And
what is that? But I want it.
Exactly. It just stuck in my head. And then I guess the first sort of vaguely production-y type stuff I did was doing loops on cassette. Like recording records on a cassette and the same bit and looping it. And anyway, so by the time I came out of school, I didn't really do anything like this at school, but went into college, was actually doing video. Not like this though, this was like VHS. And they had a 4-track machine.
Right.
And I borrowed that and started playing around with that. And that was kind of the beginning of it really, just recording stuff down on the 4-track. I distinctly remember having Cold Cuts first album. And it had like bonus beats on one of the records, and I was like recording that down and then looping it and then playing guitar over the top of it and like whatever. And then after that I started working at a venue in Harlow in Essex, which is the town where I grew up, the Square. There might be some people from there watching this today, wouldn't surprise me. Still going strong as well, and that's a great venue, and they've got a little studio in there as well. So I started getting involved in live sound and in studio stuff there. And then the band I had, we got a record deal and we started working in bigger studios, and I was always really more interested in the studio stuff than probably being in the band. I hate to say, but and it all just went on from there. Then a DJ, making breakbeat music, and I kind of done a bit of everything really. Kind of shameless. So but yeah, for me, how I got into it first was that 4-track. That was 4-track cassette.
Wicked.
Absolutely. I know.
Well, keep the questions coming in, guys. You know, and we'll try and get through as we go.
Absolutely. So I've looked at like the kick and the snare there. Okay. Now what I want to look at is the bass. Okay. Now this track has got 2 different basses in it. Now I will say that originally these had quite a bit of distortion on already, but I've like took it off so we can kind of go back to square one. But I've left all the other processing on, okay? So you can hear it's like kind of ridiculous wobble bass. You know, it's barely even wobble bass, just like all over the place. I'm using this Rob Papen sub-boom bass, which has like the ugliest interface ever, but I really love it. It's a great synth, so it's really different. You can do really sort of different stuff with it. But what I want to do is listen to this sound and kind of decide exactly what I'm going to do with it, because I want to give it that aggression. I want to get that distortion type aggression in there. But it's still got to work as a bass sound, okay? So I think what I'm probably going to do is, yet again, get a bit of a rack going, okay? And you can see, look, originally I was using the guitar amp on it, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to group up everything before the amp, okay? Open up my chains here. I'm going to call this my clean. And then I'm going to grab my amp and come back here and put this down on the chain below, okay? And what I'm going to do is, yet again, get my trusty EQ and put that before it, okay? So you can hear it's like really raspy. But listen as I take the low frequencies out. Like it really sort of, you know, you can really focus in on that area where you really want that rasp to be, which is probably going to be something like this. Okay, and then if I take that one down, and let's play the clean one.
Yeah, sounds nice.
So this is like, and now I can treat both of these separately, you know. I can like, in fact, I've just noticed that the dry and wet balance is down because it was previously just in series. So let's just try that again now. So I'll probably bring that down a bit now. And then without it. Yeah, so it's making a huge difference. Now, because I've shaved off lots and lots of low frequencies, okay, now I can start, because I do get this is something I get a lot from students, and I know I've seen questions on some of the Friday forums from YouTube viewers about this, is people hear like big, you know, kind of big room records that have these huge bass sounds which are very stereo as well. And I always see people asking, I get students asking, how do I do that? Because whenever I do that to my bass sounds, everything just falls apart. It just sounds a mess. And that's because low frequencies, in stereo processing like that on low frequencies is a nightmare. Like it's, you know, it is a disaster. Stereo is incredibly hard to portray at low frequencies. And really, I mean, I remember, in fact, I was looking at it the other day, JC's Friday Forum Live where he was doing mastering with the Brainworks EQ, the MS EQ, because I bought that plugin the other day, so I was actually going back to look at it to how do I use this?
Pros alert.
See? On that, there's a very, very sort of great feature about that is the mono maker, which is like a knob in the middle where you turn it up, and everything up to that frequency you specify goes into mono.
Oh, right.
So when you're mastering, it's great because all those low frequencies, really, you just want those to be mono, especially if it's going to vinyl. This is one of the big, because if you don't do that, the mastering engineer, I've known mastering engineers mono like half of the frequencies just to get it to go onto vinyl properly. But because we've filtered out,
now you separated you don't have that problem.
Exactly, because in this separate chain with my distortion here, if I like rename this here.
So that chain can be made more stereo.
Exactly, because that's kind of got, you know, not much in the way of low frequencies in it. So, I mean, I don't know. If I was doing this myself, I'd probably use a third-party plugin like Little Micro Shift or something like that, Sound Toys thing. But I'm just going to chuck the live chorus on it. And if we listen to that on its own, so you can see that's really, really, really modulated.
Yeah.
So. And then if we put them both together. So that, you know, is kind of the sort of way that you would achieve that thing where you get that stereo sound on a bass. You've got to make sure you separate those high frequencies and then process them, because they're fine. They can live in stereo, no problem. It's the lower frequencies of the problem.
Yeah.
If you like, I mean, I think anybody has probably experienced it. If you've been experimenting, if you've got a really bassy sound and you drop a chorus onto it or something like that, it's a nightmare. It's just going, sort of everything kind of goes like that, and it's totally unbalanced. So I think now, and again, look, I'm turning the level down. Yeah, so that, you know, I think that's really helped us.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely. I mean, the bass, you know, as you say, again, it kind of cuts through in the fact that when you bring the level down, you know, it just sits in there.
Exactly,
so
exactly.
Well. I think we've got a few questions coming in. Let's have a look. So, Tirim Birim, great name, has said, loving the session, thank you very much. What's the best way to distort a subby 808 kick to give it more character? He says it's a technique that he's found is pretty popular these days.
Yep.
He's tried using an amp, but it's too dirty. I guess using the amp plugin.
Well, if you're using live, something like this, I would definitely try. Split it into a couple of chains.
Yeah.
And the thing with I mean, I know that kind of sound with kind of trap, particularly.
That booming.
Yeah, but there's a definite edge to it. It's kind of saturated. The thing you've got to watch out for is you've always got to be aware of how much of that might come in mastering.
Okay.
So you've got to be careful, because if you've got a track which has got lots of kind of quite exposed 808, in the mastering you might add lots and lots of kind of like harmonics and a bit of excitation, and it will give it that. But if you want to try it out, I would say, particularly in live, I mean, you can do it other ways in Logic or Pro Tools or whatever. Just try and split the frequencies a little bit. Obviously with an 808, sub, there's not a lot of high frequencies, but if you can just get rid of some of the really low ones and have something that's a little bit more middly that you can really buzz, and then balance that in with the sub, it's a case of, you know, for me, when I started using live and started using the racks, it was a real like epiphany. It was like, oh my God, I can split the signal and treat different bits of it separately. Like everything is potentially multi-band. So, you know,
I guess there are a few tracks that spring to mind, you know, really kind of stripped out just that booming 808 and hats or something. So,
funny enough as well, the other thing I would say is, you know, I was saying about the order of my processing, where I'm EQing first, then distorting. Actually, thinking about it, with an 808 sub, I might actually do it the other way around. Keep all the frequencies in place, and again, have a separate chain for the 808, distort that, then filter out all the really kind of horrible super low stuff. Because that super low stuff, when it's going for the distortion, that's probably what's going to really overdo it. So I would investigate, definitely getting involved in a bit of, you know, splitting the signal into different areas.
Good advice, nice one. Let's have a look. Zimbolter has asked, what do you think about the whole loudness war? Can of worms there. Should I be aiming for a certain RMS, or should I focus on fidelity? Just wondering your thoughts on this.
Okay, so when I'm mixing, I I think the thing is with a lot of people who are making particularly dance music, not just dance music, but particularly dance music, they're not able in their heads to separate the mix and mastering stages. Right. They're all the same thing. And for me, because I'm a pro, I'm a mixing engineer, I know that I have to deliver mixes that are ready to be mastered. Yeah. So I personally aim for about -6 dB peak. Like that's not RMS. Yeah, that's peak level, with plenty of ranging. And then I do master stuff as well. Then I would start aiming for something a lot louder. And it depends on the kind of music. If it's club music, I guess, God, I don't know really. I mean, the limiting part of what I would do would be in ozone, and I would probably be aiming for like perhaps -7 RMS, something like that. But I always say to clients, look, if you want this to be mega loud, you should take it to somebody else. Because I'm not a full-time mastering engineer. You should take it to somebody else who can maybe get you the best job you want. But I would say, my advice is, when you're mixing a track, mix it without a limiter on it. Right. Aim for a peak of about -6. That is loud enough. People often look at it, students often look at it and go, that's really quiet. And it's like, no, it's loud enough. Yeah. Turn the speakers up. Yeah. Aim for about -6. Then, once you've done your mix, if you want to do a separate one with a limiter on it for maybe playing out in a club, or say you want to give a copy of it to somebody just to listen to, because I can totally appreciate that, you've got your lovely 6 dB headroom mix that you've done, and then you see some guy from a record company or management and you want to give him a copy of it, he might go, oh, it's a bit quiet.
Yeah. You want it to have an impact, I guess.
Yeah, so do an alternate one, get the limiter on it, but don't, I hate to see in live, and I get this from students, I hate to see in live, seeing on the master, the limiter, my heart sinks. I open up the session, I see a limiter on the master, I'm like, oh, and then I start it and I see the limiter meter going boom, 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 like that, and it's like, you've just destroyed everything, And
you're mixing with it on there.
Exactly, that's the thing. I mean, I've seen that so many times. I had a commercial project that I worked on, and I was supplied Logic songs, and they had PSP Vintage Warmer on the master, and when I turned it off, there was nothing there. There was just nothing. Like the mix was just, it all disappeared. There was almost nothing there. It's like the whole sound of the mix was like in Vintage Warmer. And I was thinking maybe this should just be a mastering job rather than mixing, But that's what I would advise. Treat your mix and the mastering stage totally separately. Aim for about -6 dB. Make sure there's plenty of dynamic range. There's some good meters out there you can get. If you hunt around, you can maybe find the TT dynamic range meter. That's a little bit more difficult to find these days, but if you hunt around, you'll be able to find it. Or if you're feeling extravagant, like the Dora meters from Waves and stuff like that, it will give you really good metering. But just play it a little bit safe, and just don't be afraid to turn the speakers up. It's fine. It's all digital now. Trust me, in my day, when we were using tape, that's when you really did have to crank all the levels to get over the hiss.
That's true. Well, that's coming back. I hear a lot of records with hiss on them now.
I've got endless plugins that will put hiss on if you want.
Cool, nice one, Anthony. Let's have a look what else we've got. So Declan, our boy Declan downstairs, has asked, would you use any of these tricks on the mix bus?
Yes, quite possibly, absolutely. There's different, obviously on the mix bus, you've kind of got to treat everything with kid gloves. Right. Because you don't want a PSP Vintage Warmer disaster like that job that I had to do. But you can use it to try and add like ever such a slight bit of bite to the whole mix, okay? So, I mean, you could, oh, my mouse appears to have conked out. You could do a rack type situation like I've been doing before. Now I've got a little bit of stuff here going on the mix bus already. So I've got some compression stuff happening, a little bit of EQ. And look, there's exactly what I was talking about. My limiter turned off. Yeah. But that's when the client wanted to hear it loud so he could play it in the club.
So you just got it there ready to go.
Slapped it on, So, but what we could do is, at some point, try a little bit of, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the Camel Crusher because I've had good results with this before. And I'm going to do this I'm going to try it at different positions. I'm going to try this between the compression.
I guess again, it's kind of experimenting, moving it around, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, exactly. So let's just. So basically, what I'm going to do is it's 100% wet at the moment. So you can hear that's pretty crazy. The other thing you got to be careful with, there's a compressor on the Camel Crusher. So I'm going to get this, my usual kind of like parallel technique. Get it so it's sounding quite aggressive. Like that. And then back it way off. Yeah, tiny bit. Stuff like that often can, like, you know, you can yield good results like that. I mean, for me personally, probably my favourite sort of plugins for doing stuff like this on the mix bus would be Waves Red, which I really like, which is the simulations of the Abbey Road mixers. Yeah. Soundtoys Radiator I love as well, which is kind of like a simulation of an old valve mixer, and that just sounds fantastic if you just crank the hell out of it. And maybe some tape simulation like Massive Tape Head in Pro Tools, or Magnetic, which is really cheap at the moment. Nomad Factory Magnetic, for a good cause as well, because Bernie from Nomad Factory is really sick, and they're trying to raise money for him. So they've slashed the price of all their plugins on Don't Crack. So I'd recommend go and have a look. You can get Magnetic for $19, which is just an unbelievable bargain. So I use that all the time. Sorry to plug, but it's for a good cause.
Cool. We've got a couple more. So Commit has said, saturation or distortion, what factors assist you in the decision of choosing one of the two? Why would you go for one rather than the other? Okay.
So saturation would generally be a lot more of a subtle effect. If you cast your mind back to when I was using the Camel Crusher before, when I was showing it on the sine wave, if you remember, the tube one was the very subtle one, and that was more like a saturation, whereas the mech one, that shaped it and squared the wave a lot more, so that was more like distortion. And for me, saturation I would use when I want to do something more subtle, when I want to do something where I'm not completely wrecking everything, I'm just kind of, I just want to give something a little bit more life. And Magnetic, Nomad Factory Magnetic, that's something I would use to do that. It works wonderfully.
Saturation always, for me, it seems it's something to give it slightly more depth as well, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. It is warm, you know. I mean, this is the thing, you know, those low frequencies in saturation, I find those low frequencies tend to be the ones that kind of get sort of, you know, get bitten into first. I mean, you know, if you look at the typical sort of spectrum of a dance music track, you know, it tends to be like low frequencies and sloping down a bit to the high frequencies. So naturally, those low frequencies are kind of, if you think about it, they're the first ones that get to the saturation point. So yeah, it's definitely warmer, you know, and I guess in terms of deciding which one I want to use, it would just depend how subtle I want to be. So. You know, if I wanted a, you know, for mix bus or something like that, I would probably go for a bit of saturation, although I did horrible mech there. But, and you know, a bus, if it was a bus of a lot of stuff, I'd probably use a bit of saturation. But then if it's something like that bass, where I want to take a specific part of it and really make it dirty and then process it, then it would be much more distortion along those lines. So.
Cool. Yeah, wicked. I think... someone has also asked, the final one, Multi Electronics has asked, can you tell us a little bit about spacing and reverb? I guess it's a
spacing and reverb. Wow. Okay.
Bit of a can of worms.
It's a bit, a bit of a can. Well, I'll give you the 10-second sort of thing. My sort of philosophy with reverb is. With reverb, we're trying to put things into a space, and I'm a great believer in using send and return for reverbs rather than putting on. I'm sure I've done this before on a Freeform Live. Rather than putting it on your inserts. I'm not saying you can only use one reverb. I'm saying try to limit it. Try to come up, go, okay, there's my big reverb, there's a medium one, there's a little one, and have lots of things sharing it.
So they're all in the same area.
And my other thing in terms of the level, particularly in dance music, in terms of the level of reverb, I tend to go for a thing where I notice it if I mute it rather than I'm hearing it all the time. I go, is the reverb there? And then I mute it and I hear it go. I'm like, oh yeah, that's enough. I try to be quite subtle. remember, the louder the reverb is, the more space you need in the music itself.
Yeah.
So if you know, a track like this, if I put loads and loads of reverb on it, it's just going to be a huge mess. Yeah.
I think, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it kind of depends on what you're doing, what you want to achieve as well, really.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, we are kind of approaching time.
Great.
So yeah. You guys watching at home, I hope we got through all of your questions, but if you do have anything else that you want to ask, you know, feel free to post up in the chat room. The session will be archived right away.
I'll keep an eye on the comments as well, so I'm happy to answer some questions. So.
Cool. So yeah, keep an eye on the YouTube channel. It will be archived, as I say, pretty much instantly, and we'll try and get the questions over to Anthony. And yeah, we'll be back again next week, same time, 4 p.m. on Friday. Thanks for watching, and thank you, Anthony.
No problem, my pleasure.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.